Did you first receive intelligence about the possibility of an attack on the Capitol on January 6th? And what happened to the process that people weren't seeing the warnings?
Well, Senator, I think the intelligence or the information that you're asking about is the much discussed Norfolk SIR, or Situational Information Report. I didn't see that report, which was raw, unverified intelligence, until some number of days after the 6th. But again, that raw, unverified information was passed within, I think, 40 minutes to an hour to our partners, including the Capitol Police, including Metro PD, in not one, not two, but 3 different ways: one email, one verbal, and one through the law enforcement portal. As to why the information didn't flow to all the people within the various departments that they would prefer, I don't have a good answer for that. I will tell you the Capitol Police and Metro PD are terrific partners to the FBI, especially our Washington field office. I'm grateful for their partnership and have nothing but admiration for the hard work and courage and professionalism of the men and women who work in both of those agencies.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you for your good work. It's appreciated.
Senator Cornyn.
Director Wray, after the events of 9/11, I think it was Admiral Bobby Inman who coined the phrase "a failure of imagination." We just couldn't conceive of the idea that something like what happened on 9/11 would occur, but that was a failure to imagine it. And it strikes me that the events of January the 6th share something in common with 9/11 in the sense that it seemed like there was a failure of imagination. That's not to point the finger at anybody to blame, but merely to try to describe what I think may have occurred. So I think you've told us that these extremists are not monolithic. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, I've heard the expression that here in Washington, whoever has the best narrative wins. And so sometimes I think the narrative is created and then try to search for facts that might bolster that narrative. But as you said, the fact is these extremist groups are not monolithic. So that's, I think, an important part of understanding the threat. I've heard them described, some of these folks described as white supremacists, domestic terrorists, insurrectionists, rioters, seditionists, anarchists. The list goes on and on. But I note that you said there is no federal crime described as domestic terrorism per se, correct?
That's correct.
And as I look at the range of charges that the FBI and the Department of Justice have made against the people that have been investigated for the events of January the 6th, I read a list of assaulting federal officers, tampering with documents or proceedings, unlawful entry, disorderly conduct, conspiracy, theft of government property. Do you think the current laws are adequate to deal with this threat? It strikes me as these are a lot of different tools that are available, but don't really get to the whole heart of domestic terrorism.
Well, I guess I'd say a couple things in response to that. It's of course a very good question. I think number one, our folks, which is one of the things I love about the men and women of the FBI, have proven time and again that they will work with the tools they have, and they are resourceful and entrepreneurial, and we've had remarkably good success at disrupting attacks using the tools that we have. Sometimes those tools and some of the offenses that you listed off have the virtue of being quite simple and straightforward to prove, and so sometimes that's actually a blessing. But certainly, I think you would be hard-pressed to find any FBI director that wouldn't welcome more tools in the toolbox.
Fair enough. Well, getting back to this narrative about who was involved on January the 6th, there was a helpful report from the George Washington University Program on Extremism that looked at about 257 federal defendants as a result of the events of January the 6th. They noted that 142 of those 257 defendants they referred to as inspired believers. They said they concluded they were neither participants in any violent extremist group nor connected with any individual who stormed the Capitol. Again, I guess bears out your conclusion, your statement that this is not a monolithic group again.
So I think you've touched on two very important points there. One is both with domestic violent extremists and, frankly, with what we call the homegrown violent extremists, which are the jihadist-inspired, the difference between inspired terrorist attacks and over here and domestic and sort of directed or facilitated, in a more structured, formal way, is something that I think a lot of Americans struggle with understanding. And more, the threat that we face as a country is what I would call the inspired attacks. They don't have formal membership in an organization. They don't have clear command and control direction in the way that, say, an al-Qaeda sleeper cell might have. And that's that much more challenging to pursue, A, because there are fewer dots to connect, the old expression about dots to connect. Right. B, less time in which to connect whatever dots there are. And then you add into it, C, the sort of First Amendment dimensions of people's inspirations and ideology. And then the last point I would make is that we have these, as I said before, increasingly blended ideologies. So, for example, in Senator Klobuchar's state in Minnesota, we had two individuals who identified themselves as so-called Boogaloo Boys, which people tend to put kind of in one bucket, and yet what they ultimately were charged with was trying to provide material support, as in weapons, to Hamas. And these are not things that neatly fit together in anybody's worldview. So it just illustrates one example, but it illustrates the challenge that we're dealing with.